The air in the penthouse boardroom of Finch Industries was so thin and cold, it felt like the summit of a mountain. It smelled of ozone from the thunderstorms lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the palpable fear of 50 brilliant minds about to be rendered obsolete. They were the world's most decorated geologists, metallurgists and historians, and they sat in a terrified, pin-drop silence around a 20-foot slab of polished granite that served as a conference table. At the head of the table, Alistair Finch stood not like a chairman, but like a hawk surveying a field of mice. At 68, he was a relic from an era of ruthless industrial titans, a man who had built a global empire on iron ore and raw nerve. His fortune was old, vast and secure, but his time was not. He had summoned these 50 experts, paying them a collective $20 million for a single week of their time to unlock the secret of the object that sat before them. And they had failed. The object was a sphere, no larger than a human skull, forged from a coppery metal that defied analysis. It was covered in interlocking rings etched with characters that were neither Mandarin nor any known hieroglyph. For 2,000 years, it had been a legend, the celestial mandate of the Han dynasty, an artifact rumored to predict the fall of a unique meteor, a star stone that could revolutionize energy production. Alistair had spent a decade and a fortune to find it, and now it sat on his table, silent and useless. The silence was finally broken, not by a trembling professor, but by the soft, almost imperceptible click of a latch. It was the sound of a young waitress securing the wobbly wheel on her service cart, a tiny, practical act of maintenance in a room paralyzed by intellectual failure. As Alistair's gaze, sharp and merciless as a raptor's, swept the room, ready to unleash a career-ending tirade, the waitress spoke, her voice a quiet murmur, not meant for him, but for the silent machine on the table. "You're singing the wrong note," she whispered. "That's why you're in pain." The boardroom on the 101st floor of the Finch Tower was a monument to power. The panoramic view of a rain-swept Chicago was meant to make visitors feel small, a speck in the vast urban landscape Alistair Finch commanded. But tonight, no one dared look at the view. Every eye was on Alistair as he paced, his bespoke shoes making no sound on the imported marble. He was a man who had outlived his rivals, his friends, and 2 of his own children. He was chasing not more wealth, but a legacy that would outlast stone, and he was running out of time. "Let me be perfectly clear," Alistair said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that cut through the tension. He didn't need to raise it. When Alistair Finch spoke, markets trembled. "I have compensated your universities with endowments that could fund them for a decade. I have provided you with every piece of scanning technology known to man. You have the full weight of Finch Industries at your disposal. And you are telling me that the 50 most distinguished scholars on the planet cannot decipher a simple mechanical puzzle." At the far end of the table, Dr. Elias Vance, a celebrated historian from Yale, with a mane of white hair and an ego to match, cleared his throat. He was accustomed to fawning donors, not furious billionaires. "Mr. Finch, with all due respect, this is not a simple puzzle. The metallurgy is unknown. The script, it shares roots with ancient seal script, but the syntax is unlike anything we've ever encountered. We believe it's a celestial map, but the star charts are wrong. They don't correspond to any known alignment in recorded history." "Then your history is wrong, Elias," Alistair snapped, his fist clenching. "I didn't pay you $10 million to tell me what you don't know. I paid you to give me an answer." He gestured to the sphere. It was discovered in a seismic vault, designed to withstand the shifting of tectonic plates. The men who built it didn't intend, for it to be a paperweight. Clara adjusted her crisp white apron, trying to remain invisible by the service station. She was just a ghost in the machine of this opulent room, a 22-year-old art history dropout from the University of Chicago, working for a high-end catering service to pay for her grandmother's medical bills. Her feet throbbed. She had been on them for 9 hours, listening to these men argue in circles, their voices a drone of academic jargon. She knew she should be refilling the crystal water glasses, but her eyes kept drifting to the sphere. The high-resolution scans displayed on the wall-sized monitor behind Alistair showed every scratch and glyph, but they were cold, sterile. The object itself, sitting there on the table, felt different. It felt alive. She could feel a vibration through the soles of her worn-out flats, a faint, high-frequency hum that no one else seemed to notice. It was a dissonant sound, like a finely tuned instrument with one string pulled too tight. The primary glyph appears to denote a dragon, a metallurgist from MIT argued, pointing a laser at the screen. A symbol of imperial power. Perhaps it's a ceremonial object. Nonsense. The striations indicate a kinetic purpose, Vance countered, his voice dripping with condescension. It's clearly a navigational device. The dragon is a river system in the Kunlun Mountains. A river system? Alistair turned, his eyes glacial. I'm looking for the landing site of the Heavenly Stone. The mandate is supposed to be the key. If this is a map to a fishing spot, then every one of you will be teaching at a community college in North Dakota by Monday. The room descended into a frantic buzz of competing theories, a panicked symphony of intellects trying to save their reputations. Clara moved forward to clear away some used coffee cups. As she reached for Dr. Vance's cup, her gaze fell upon the sphere again. The hum intensified, and in her mind she didn't see glyphs or dragons. She saw gears, she saw counterweights. She saw a beautiful, intricate machine crying out in mechanical distress. "You're singing the wrong note," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "That's why you're in pain." It was so quiet, a breath of sound in the cavernous room. But Alistair Finch had the hearing of a man who had spent a lifetime listening for the slightest hint of betrayal in a boardroom whisper. He stopped pacing. The frantic arguments died down as everyone followed his gaze. He turned, slowly, methodically, until his eyes locked onto the girl in the black and white uniform. "What did you say?" Alistair asked. Clara froze, the porcelain cup rattling in her hand. "Don't speak. You need this job. Grandma's prescription needs refilling tomorrow." "I asked you," Alistair repeated, taking a step away from the table, his shadow falling over her. "What you just said." Dr. Vance scoffed, turning in his plush leather chair. "Mr. Finch, for heaven's sake, the catering staff is overtired. Let's not distract ourselves with the mutterings of the help." "Quiet," Alistair commanded, his voice dropping another octave. He never took his eyes off Clara. He walked until he was standing directly in front of her. He smelled of old leather, cedar, and an unshakable authority. You spoke to it." "Why?" Clara looked up, meeting his intense, pale blue eyes. She saw past the anger and saw a profound weariness, the exhaustion of a man at the end of a very long hunt. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to speak aloud." "You called it in pain," Alistair pressed. He pointed a long, bony finger at the sphere. "That is a piece of metal. It does not feel pain. Explain yourself." Something inside Clara, worn down by exhaustion and the condescension in Vance's voice, finally snapped. It was the arrogance of it all. These brilliant men treating this magnificent creation like a dead text, ignoring its true language. She straightened her back, her tired expression replaced by a spark of defiance. "Because it's a chronometer, sir." Not a map, she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority that stunned the room into silence. And its primary escapement is misaligned. The hum. It's the vibration of a counterweight grinding against its housing. It's been doing it for 2,000 years. It's a miracle it hasn't shaken itself to pieces. The silence that followed was absolute. 50 of the world's greatest minds stared, mouths agape, at the waitress. Dr. Vance let out a short, derisive laugh. A chronometer? My dear girl, where did you get such a fanciful notion? Did you read that in a comic book? My grandfather was a horologist, Clara said, her chin held high. He restored antique automata. He specialized in pre-dynastic Chinese mechanics. He taught me that before you can read the face of a clock, you have to listen to its heart. She walked past the stunned Dr. Vance, ignoring his sputtering indignation, and approached the table. She felt small before the massive granite slab, but the sphere on its surface felt like an old friend. You're all reading the symbols as language, she said, pointing not at the screen, but at the object itself. They aren't, not entirely. They're engineering schematics, disguised as astrological symbols. This isn't a dragon. She touched one of the larger glyphs. It's a diagram for a compound gear train. And this isn't a river. It's a warning about harmonic resonance. She looked directly at Alistair. The star chart isn't wrong, sir. It's predictive. It's not showing where the stars were. It's showing where they will be. But you can't see the final alignment until the machine is properly calibrated. It needs to be tuned. Tuned? Vance barked, finding his voice. You propose we tamper with a priceless 2,000-year-old artifact based on the word of a child who serves canapes. This is an insult. Mr. Finch, I must insist you have her removed. Alistair didn't look at Vance. His gaze was fixed on Clara, a strange, calculating light in his eyes. He had gambled on experts, and they had failed. What was one more gamble on the impossible? Show me, he said. Clara took a deep breath. She reached out a hand that was steady, a hand accustomed to working with tiny, delicate instruments. The experts gasped. Several of them half rose from their seats. Don't touch it, Vance cried. The patina, the molecular integrity. Clara ignored him. Her fingers gently traced the interlocking rings of the sphere. The outer ring controls the orbital inclination, the inner ring, the axial precession. They've been forced out of alignment, probably during the earthquake that exposed the vault. You have to release the tension on the primary counterweight before you can reset the orbital plane. She found a tiny, almost invisible seam near the sphere's pole. With a practiced touch, she pressed it. A section of the sphere slid open, revealing a complex inner world of gears and levers, all crafted from the same unidentifiable metal. Inside, a small weight was vibrating furiously, held in place by a pin. Dr. Vance, Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm. Your scans of this object, did they show this internal mechanism? Vance stammered, his face turning a blotchy red. We assumed it was solid. The density readings were anomalous. Clara produced a simple hairpin from the tight bun at the nape of her neck. It was a tool her grandfather had taught her to use for delicate adjustments. Carefully, she inserted the pin into the mechanism, nudging the vibrating counterweight a fraction of a millimeter to the left. The dissonant hum stopped. The silence in the room was now profound, heavy. And then, a new sound began. A soft, melodic whirring. The interlocking rings on the sphere began to rotate, slowly and silently, moving with a precision that modern engineering would struggle to replicate. They realigned themselves, clicking into a new configuration. A single beam of pure white light shot from the top of the sphere, hitting the vaulted ceiling of the boardroom. The light fractured, spreading out into a breathtaking, three-dimensional star map that filled the entire room. It was a sea of constellations, but they were moving, planets orbiting suns, galaxies swirling in a slow, cosmic ballet. The display was alive. Then, in the center of the celestial projection, one star began to glow brighter, a fiery red. A trajectory line appeared, tracing a path from the star across the projected cosmos, ending at a specific point on a map of Earth that had now materialized on the floor. A set of coordinates glowed on the marble, pulsing with a steady, rhythmic light. The Gobi Desert. Alistair Finch stared at the projection, his face a mask of awe. He slowly turned his gaze from the heavens on his ceiling to the 50 stunned faces of the world's greatest experts. "Get out," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Finch, please, this is a breakthrough. We must document," Vance began, rising from his chair. "Get out!" Alistair roared, the sound echoing off the glass like a thunderclap. "All of you, your contracts are terminated. Your services are no longer required. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises before my security team assists you." The experts scrambled, a flurry of panicked motion as they gathered their expensive briefcases and laptops, fleeing the room like startled birds. Within a minute, the vast space was empty, save for Alistair, Clara, and the silent, glowing universe projected around them. Clara stood by the table, suddenly aware of her worn-out shoes and the hairpin still clutched in her fingers. She had just humiliated 50 of the most powerful academics in the world. She needed to leave. I should get the check for the catering service, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she turned to go. "Stay where you are," Alistair's voice commanded, stopping her in her tracks. He walked toward her, the projected stars swirling around him. The predatory anger was gone, replaced by an expression of raw, unvarnished intensity. He stopped just a foot away, studying her as if she were as complex and fascinating as the device she had just unlocked. "Who are you?" he asked. "And don't you dare tell me you're a waitress." Clara looked down at her hands that could disassemble a 19th century Swiss watch and put it back together again. "My name is Clara. My grandfather, he taught me. He said the ancients didn't build machines. They built conversations between metal and mathematics. I just listened." "Your grandfather," Alistair said, a hint of something unreadable in his tone. "He left you this knowledge, but you serve coffee to fools like Elias Vance. Why?" "He left me his workshop," she said quietly, the grief of his passing 2 years prior still a fresh ache. "And his debts. I had to drop out of my program to keep it from being repossessed. I was studying historical preservation." She finally looked up at him. "I work here so I can afford to buy spare parts for a broken automaton of a Song Dynasty water clock. It's all I have left of him." Alistair stared at her for a long, silent moment. He looked at her cheap uniform, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, and the quiet dignity in her posture. He, a man who could buy and sell countries, was looking at a young woman who was fighting to save a single broken clock. He strode to his desk at the far end of the room and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled furiously. "Dr. Vance's consulting fee for today was $250,000, he said, his back to her. He was wrong. He turned and slid the check across the granite table. It was made out to her for $1 million. Clara looked at the check, at the impossible number of zeros. It was enough to solve every problem she had. But it felt wrong. It felt like a payment for a trick, not a lifetime of inherited passion. "I can't accept this, Mr. Finch," she said, pushing it back. "I just wanted it to stop hurting." "This isn't a tip, young lady," Alistair said, his eyes narrowing. "It's a retainer. I'm offering you a job." Clara blinked. "I have a job. I have two, actually." "Not anymore," Alistair said. He gestured to the glowing coordinates on the floor. "That location in the Gobi is not the destination. It's the beginning. The legend of the Mandate says it leads to an observatory, a place where the ancient sky watchers guarded the heavenly stone. That observatory will be filled with traps. Not curses and magic, but mechanical puzzles, astronomical locks, and chronometric triggers. My security team has body armor and rifles. They are useless against a 2,000-year-old pressure plate." He stepped closer, the intensity in his eyes burning brighter. He extended a hand, not in charity, but as a proposal. "Come with me to the Gobi, Clara. Be my horologist. Help me navigate what's to come. In return, I will clear your grandfather's debts, establish a trust to fund his workshop in perpetuity, and endow a chair in your name at any university you choose." He paused. "Help me find my legacy, and I will help you reclaim yours." Clara looked at his outstretched hand. It was the hand of a ruthless man, a predator. She knew the stories. But then she looked at the silent, beautiful machine on the table, now humming in a perfect, harmonious rhythm. It was her grandfather's language. It was a conversation she was born to have. She placed her small, calloused hand into his. "I'll need to pack a toolkit," she said. The Gulfstream G800 was not so much an airplane as it was a pressurized penthouse that traveled at 94% of the speed of sound. Clara sat in a plush armchair that cost more than her car, still wearing the simple black dress Alistair's assistant had procured for her. She had insisted on keeping her worn leather tool roll, which now sat on the polished mahogany table like a rustic relic in a sterile museum. Across from her, Alistair was a whirlwind of activity, orchestrating a massive logistical operation via a secure satellite phone. He spoke in clipped, precise English to his head of security, then switched to fluent German to coordinate with a geological survey team he had on standby in Munich. The man was less a CEO and more a field marshal deploying his armies. He finished his call and poured 2 glasses of what Clara recognized as a prohibitively expensive single malt scotch. "Drink," he commanded, more than offered. "It will steady your nerves." Clara ignored the glass. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Finch? You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. This heavenly stone. What is it, really?" Alistair sat down, the fine leather sighing under his weight. For the first time, he looked his age. History remembers builders, Clara. Alexander, Caesar, the pharaohs. They built empires, monuments. I've built a portfolio, a series of numbers on a screen that will be divided up, sold off, and forgotten within a generation of my death. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. The element in that meteorite, our probes suggest it has unique properties. A power density 1,000 times greater than uranium, with 0 radioactive decay. It could power our cities for centuries, cleanly, safely. He looked out the window at the curve of the earth. I don't want to be remembered for my wealth. I want to be the man who gave the world the stars. The ambition was so vast, so audacious, it left Clara breathless. This wasn't about greed. It was about a desperate, final grasp at immortality. "Sir," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, "we're on approach to our landing site in the Badain Jaran Desert, but we have a situation. There's another encampment at the coordinates, a big one, unidentified." Alistair's face hardened, the weariness vanishing, replaced by cold steel. Put them on screen. A monitor descended from the ceiling, showing a live satellite feed. In the desolate, wind-swept landscape of the Gobi, a collection of black, military-grade tents and heavy drilling equipment was clustered around the exact coordinates projected by the mandate. "They're not unidentified," Alistair growled, a deep and personal venom in his voice. "Zoom in on the lead vehicle." The camera zoomed, revealing a small, discreet logo on the door, a stylized T entwined with a serpent. "Thorn." "Thorn?" Clara asked. "Marcus Thorn." Alistair spat the name like a curse. "He was my protégé years ago. Brilliant geologist. But he was reckless. He cut corners on a mine shaft analysis in Chile. Said it was stable. It collapsed. 17 men died." Alistair's knuckles were white as he gripped his glass. "I fired him. Blacklisted him from the industry. He swore he'd ruin me." He looked at the screen. His eyes narrowed. "It seems he's been busy." "How could he know where to look?" Clara asked. "We only just found the location." "Vance," Alistair said, the realization dawning. "That pompous fool from Yale. He wasn't just incompetent. He was a mole. He's been feeding information to Thorn for months, trying to slow me down while Thorn's team searched for the entrance." He looked at Clara. "Thorn doesn't have the key. He has the location, but he can't get in. He's been trying to brute force it. But now we're arriving with the key." The jet began its descent, the vast, ochre emptiness of the Gobi rising to meet them. "Listen to me, Clara," Alistair said, his voice urgent. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Thorn is not like me. I am a predator, but I hunt in the boardroom. Thorn learned his trade in blood diamond territories and war zones. He is a butcher. Once we are on the ground, you do exactly as I say. You do not speak to him. You do not look at him. You solve the puzzles and you keep moving. Is that understood?" "I understand," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs. The jet's wheels touched down on a makeshift runway, smoothed from the desert floor. The door hissed open and a blast of superheated, sand-filled air rushed in. But it wasn't just air. Crack! A high-velocity round splintered the doorframe, embedding itself in the bulkhead inches from Alistair's head. "Sniper!" Alistair yelled, shoving Clara back and down onto the floor. He slammed the button to close the door, but another shot rang out, punching a spiderweb crack through the cockpit's reinforced window. "They're not here to negotiate," Alistair snarled, pulling Clara behind the bar as the jet's engines screamed, the pilots attempting a desperate turnaround on the narrow strip. "They're here to take the key from my dead hands." Clara lay on the plush carpet, the scent of expensive scotch and cordite filling her nostrils. Hours ago, her greatest danger was spilling soup on a client. Now she was pinned down in a tin can in the middle of a desert, with a sniper trying to kill her. She looked at Alistair, who was already on the phone with his security detail, ordering them to engage. She thought of her grandfather's workshop, the quiet, peaceful world of ticking clocks and whirring gears. Then she remembered one of his favorite lessons. "Every machine has a weakness, little bird. A foolish man attacks its strengths. A wise man finds the single pin that holds the whole thing together and gives it a gentle push." "Alistair," she said, tugging on the sleeve of his expensive suit. "Stay down," he hissed. "No, listen," she said, her mind racing, fear giving way to a strange, crystalline clarity. "He knows we have the mandate. He needs it. He won't destroy the plane. He's just pinning us down." Alistair looked at her, his expression grim. "Your point?" "His strength is the sniper and his men outside. Our weakness is that we're trapped in here." She took a deep breath. "So we change the equation. We give him what he wants." "Are you insane?" He'll kill us the moment we step outside. He won't kill me, Clara said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous idea. You're the billionaire he wants dead. I'm the girl who can open the door. He needs my brain, not my body. I'm the key. Alistair stared at her, seeing the gears turning behind her eyes. And what happens after you've opened the door for him? Who says I'll open it correctly? Clara whispered, a faint, determined smile touching her lips. The mandate isn't just a key. It's a 2,000-year-old security system. I'm willing to bet it has a few features the user manual failed to mention. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Alistair Finch's face. You are full of surprises, Clara. I'm just getting started, she said, pushing herself up. Now tell your pilots to shut down the engines. We're surrendering. The act of surrender was a carefully choreographed piece of theatre. They walked down the air stairs into the brutal, oppressive heat of the Gobi, their hands raised high. The sun was a merciless hammer in the sky. 3 armored jeeps were positioned in a semicircle around the jet, a dozen men in tactical gear leveling assault rifles at them. A figure emerged from the shimmering heat haze. Marcus Thorne was the physical opposite of Alistair. Where Alistair was lean and elegant, Thorne was built like a bull, with a thick neck and a sun-scorched face. He wore dusty cargo pants and a sweat-stained shirt, a heavy revolver strapped to his thigh. He looked less like a geologist and more like a warlord. Alistair, Thorne boomed, his voice a gravelly baritone. He clapped his hands together in mock applause. You old dog. I knew you'd find it. I just didn't think you'd be foolish enough to deliver it to me personally. The area is legally leased to Finch Industries, Marcus, Alistair said, his voice calm and even, betraying no fear. You're trespassing. Your leases don't mean much out here, Thorne grinned, revealing a row of unnervingly white teeth. Out here, the man with the bigger gun makes the law. His eyes shifted to Clara, lingering on her with a cold, appraising stare. And this must be the prodigy. I heard a rumor you'd replaced the entire academic community with a girl from the catering staff. Vance sends his regards, by the way. He's enjoying his early retirement in the Caymans. Thorne gestured with his chin. The sphere. Hand it over. Alistair nodded to Clara. She was holding the mandate in a padded case. She walked forward and placed it on the hood of the lead jeep. Thorne's men immediately surrounded it. A technician in a dusty lab coat emerged and began running a scanner over it. Don't bother, Clara said, her voice surprisingly loud in the vast emptiness. Your scans won't penetrate the casing. It's a tellurium copper alloy. It dampens all electromagnetic signals. Thorne's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. She speaks, and she knows metallurgy. He walked over to her, circling her like a shark. You are the key, aren't you? You know how to make it work. She's my assistant, Alistair cut in, taking a step forward. She does what I tell her. She does what the machine tells her, Thorne corrected, never taking his eyes off Clara. He nodded to his men. 2 of them grabbed Alistair, forcing him to his knees and binding his hands behind his back. Alistair, Clara cried out. Don't worry about him, Thorne said, grabbing her arm, his grip like a vice. His life depends entirely on your cooperation. We've found the entrance, a stone door, 20 feet high, sealed shut for 2 millennia. My demolition team says blasting it could bring the whole mountain down. So you, he said, his face inches from hers, are going to open it for me. Finesse, not force. He dragged her toward one of the jeeps. Bring the old man, he barked. He gets a front row seat. The entrance to the observatory was a magnificent feat of ancient engineering. A massive, circular stone door was set into the face of a sheer rock cliff, so perfectly carved that it was nearly invisible. The surface was covered in the same complex glyphs as the sphere, a silent, unbreachable shield. Thorn's team had scarred the area around it with drill marks and scorches from small explosive charges. "Impressive, isn't it?" Thorn said, shoving Clara toward the door. "Utterly impenetrable." Clara knelt, her hand hovering over the cold stone. She could feel the faintest tremor from within, a sign of a vast and complex mechanism lying dormant. She placed the celestial mandate on a small, flat pedestal in front of the door. "Well," Thorn demanded, his patience wearing thin. "Get on with it." Clara looked at the glyphs on the door. They were different from the ones on the sphere. These were a warning. The sky breathes in, the mountain breathes out. Mismatch the rhythm, and the serpent wakes. "It's a resonance lock," she announced. "The sphere emits a low-frequency pulse. I have to match that frequency by rotating the rings on the door. It's like safe-cracking, but with acoustics." "Then do it," Thorn said, gesturing to Alistair, who was being held at gunpoint nearby. "Or your employer loses his ability to walk." Clara took a deep breath. This was the moment. The trap. The warning about the serpent was clear. A mismatched frequency wouldn't just fail to open the door, it would trigger a defense mechanism. She placed her hands on the outermost ring of the door. She knew the correct sequence, but she wasn't going to use it. She began to turn the ring, slowly, deliberately. She rotated it 5 degrees past the correct alignment point. "You have to activate the mandate first," she said to Thorn's technician. "It needs to send its pulse." The technician nodded and pressed a sequence on his keypad. The sphere on the pedestal began to hum, the pure harmonic tone that Clara had restored. A low thrumming sound echoed from within the stone door as it received the signal. Clara made her final, incorrect adjustment to the inner ring. For a moment, nothing happened. "Is that it?" Thorn Grody. "Did it work?" Then, a deep, grinding sound echoed from within the mountain. It wasn't the sound of tumblers unlocking. It was the sound of something ancient and heavy being released. Click. Hiss. A section of the desert floor, a 20-foot circle directly in front of the stone door, suddenly gave way. It wasn't a pitfall, it was a perfectly engineered sand trap. The solid ground dissolved into a swirling vortex of sand, like a massive hourglass being inverted. Thorn's technician, who had been standing right next to the mandate, screamed as the ground vanished beneath him. He was swallowed by the sand in seconds. 2 of Thorn's guards were also caught, their rifles and panicked shouts disappearing into the churning pit. The mandate, sitting on its pedestal, was now on a small island of stable rock, surrounded by the swirling sand trap. "What have you done?" Thorn roared, grabbing Clara and pulling her back as the vortex widened. "I told you it was a resonance lock," she shouted over the noise. "I must have mismatched the frequency. It triggered a defensive sequence." Thorn stared at the churning sand, then at the mandate, now completely inaccessible. His face was a mask of pure fury. He raised his hand to strike her, but then his eyes fell on Alistair. He smiled, a chilling, predatory grin. "You are clever, girl. Very clever. But you've made a tactical error." He dragged Clara over to the edge of the sandpit and pushed her to her knees. He pressed the cold barrel of his revolver to her temple. "Alistair!" Thorn shouted, his voice carrying over the roar of the sand. "It seems your little genius has created a problem for us. The key is over there, and we are over here. But I have a very strong suspicion that she knows how to disarm this little trap. So here's my offer. You are going to walk across that sand. I don't know how. Maybe there's a pattern. Maybe it's just luck. But you're going to retrieve that sphere and bring it to me. If you refuse, or if you get swallowed by the sand, I will put a bullet in your horologist's clever little head." Alistair, still on his knees, looked from the swirling vortex of death to Clara's terrified face. Thorn had turned their own trap against them. "Don't do it, Alistair," Clara whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. Thorn cocked the hammer of his revolver. The sound was a final, deadly click. "The clock is ticking, old man," Thorn sneered. "Make your choice." Alistair looked at the swirling sand, a seemingly impossible obstacle. But he hadn't built an empire by backing down from impossible odds. He was a man who understood pressure, stress points, and foundations. He looked not at the sand itself, but at the pattern it was making. It wasn't a random churn. It was a gyre spiraling inward. His eyes scanned the perimeter of the trap. He saw what Clara's trap had been designed to hide. At the edge of the pit, almost invisible against the rock, were a series of small, carved stone markers, each bearing a different glyph from the mandate. They weren't decorative. They were a path. Thorn's men cut Alistair's bonds. He rose slowly, his old joints protesting. He walked to the edge of the pit. "A foolish way to die, Alistair," Thorn chuckled. Alistair ignored him. He looked at Clara, and for a fraction of a second, his cold, calculating gaze softened. He gave her a barely perceptible nod, a silent message of trust. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the first stone marker, the one carved with the symbol for wind. The sand beneath his foot held firm. He took another step to a stone marked mountain. It also held. He began to move, a slow, deliberate dance across the face of death, stepping from one hidden glyph to the next. The path was not straight. It zigzagged across the vortex, forcing him to take long, precarious strides. Clara watched, her heart in her throat. She had designed the trap to be disarmed by a sequence entered into the mandate itself. She had never imagined there was a physical path across it. The observatory's builders had planned for every contingency. Alistair reached the central pedestal. He picked up the mandate. He turned, his face grim, and began the treacherous journey back. He was halfway across when a tremor shook the ground. The gyre of sand began to spin faster, the safe stones starting to shudder. The trap was recalibrating. "Hurry up, old man!" Thorn yelled, his voice edged with panic. Alistair lunged for the final stone, his foot slipping on the loose gravel at the edge of the pit. He stumbled, falling hard onto the solid ground, the mandate flying from his grasp. It rolled to a stop at Thorn's feet. Thorn laughed, a sound of pure triumph. He scooped up the sphere. "Excellent. My thanks for your efforts." He aimed his revolver not at Alistair, but at Clara. "Unfortunately, your services are no longer required." "No!" Alistair shouted, scrambling to his feet. Boom! The gunshot was deafening, but it didn't come from Thorn's revolver. It came from behind him. One of Thorn's own men, a sniper positioned on the cliffs above, crumpled to the ground. A second shot rang out, kicking up dust near the feet of the men holding Alistair. A helicopter crested the cliff face, sleek and black, bearing the Finch Industries logo. Side doors slid open, revealing a team of heavily armed security personnel. "Thorn!" Alistair's voice boomed, now filled with its old authority. "You are surrounded. My security team has you outmanned and outgunned. Stand down!" Thorn stared at the helicopter, then at the mandate in his hand, then at Clara. His face twisted into a snarl of pure desperation. He grabbed Clara, pulling her up and holding her as a human shield. The sphere clutched in his other hand. "It's not over!" he screamed, dragging her backward toward the stone door. "The door, open it now, or we all die here!" "Do as he says, Clara," Alistair yelled. He knew Thorn was a cornered animal and more dangerous than ever. Shaking, Clara placed her hands on the massive stone rings. Thorn pressed the mandate into her other hand. Activate it. The right sequence this time. Clara's mind raced. The real sequence would open the door, but the glyphs had warned. The sky breathes in. The mountain breathes out. It was an instruction about air pressure. Opening the door would equalize the pressure between the outside world and the sealed observatory. The resulting outflow of stale, 2,000-year-old air could be toxic, or at the very least, disorienting. She activated the mandate. The harmonic hum began. She spun the rings, her fingers flying across the cold stone, this time finding the correct, resonant points. A deep, satisfying clunk echoed from within the mountain. With a groan of ancient stone, the massive circular door began to retract into the cliff face. A blast of cold, musty air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust, decay, and something else. A faint, metallic odor. Now! Thorn shoved Clara through the opening, into the darkness beyond. He turned to fire a few wild shots back at Alistair's team before ducking inside himself. Alistair rushed forward. Clara. He reached the doorway just as the massive stone door began to close again, the security sequence re-engaging. He slipped through the gap an instant before it sealed shut with a boom that shook the mountain, plunging them all into absolute darkness. They were inside, trapped with a desperate armed man. The darkness was total, a thick, suffocating blackness that seemed to swallow sound. The air was thin and cold, tasting of sterile rock and the metallic tang of ozone. Clara could hear Thorn's ragged breathing somewhere to her left, and Alistair's steady, controlled breaths behind her. "Lights!" Thorn growled. A powerful beam from a tactical flashlight cut through the gloom, momentarily blinding them. Thorn played the beam around the chamber. They were in a vast, circular antechamber. The walls were smooth, polished obsidian, and the ceiling was so high the flashlight beam couldn't find it. In the center of the room, the floor descended into a massive, recessed pit, and in the center of that pit, suspended by what looked like a single, impossibly thin column of rock, was a platform. On the platform stood a telescope, a magnificent instrument of bronze and polished crystal, aimed at a circular opening in the ceiling far above. "The heart of the observatory," Alistair breathed, his voice filled with awe. "How do we get to it?" Thorn demanded, shoving Clara toward the edge of the pit. The drop was at least 100 feet. There was no bridge, no stairs. Clara's eyes, now adjusting to the dim light, scanned the obsidian walls. They weren't smooth. They were covered in faint, concentric circles, like the rings of a tree, and along those rings were the familiar glyphs of the mandate. "It's not a pit," Clara said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "It's an auditorium, and the walls, they're a codex." She pointed the small penlight she carried in her tool roll at the nearest glyph. "These are star charts, but they're arranged by time. It's a history of the heavens." "I don't care about a history lesson," Thorn snarled. "I want the meteorite. Where is it?" "Patience, Marcus." Alistair's voice was calm, but carried a new edge of confidence. He was no longer a hostage. He was in his element, a complex environment with rules to be deciphered. "This place was built by geniuses, not thugs. You can't force your way to the prize." Thorn swung his flashlight beam toward a section of the wall. Set into the obsidian was a series of bronze levers, each marked with a different constellation. "Perhaps not, but I'm willing to bet one of these is the right one." He started toward the levers. "Wait!" Clara cried out. "Don't touch them randomly." But Thorn was beyond listening. He grabbed the first lever, the one marked with the glyph for Draco, the dragon, and pulled it down with all his strength. A terrible grinding sound filled the chamber. not from the walls but from above. A section of the high ceiling slid open, and a shower of sand began to pour into the room. Not the fine desert sand from outside, but coarse, heavy, black sand, cascading down like a deadly waterfall. "What's happening?" Thorn yelled, backing away. "It's a time lock, a giant hourglass," Clara realized, her eyes wide with horror. "You've started the countdown. When the sand runs out..." "The entire chamber will be filled, crushing us," Alistair finished grimly. "You fool, Thorn, you've killed us all." The sand was already ankle-deep, pouring in faster now. Thorn, in a panic, began pulling the other levers at random. With each pull, the grinding intensified, and more openings appeared in the ceiling, turning the shower of sand into a deluge. "Stop!" Clara screamed. "You're making it worse!" She ran to the wall, her small light dancing across the glyphs. "It's a sequence. The charts. They're a timeline of stellar drift. We have to pull the levers in the order the constellations appeared to the Han astronomers," she pointed. "Ursa Major first, then Orion, then Cassiopeia." Alistair, seeing the logic instantly, moved to help her. Together they began to move along the wall, pushing the levers up into their original positions. With each correct reset, one of the sand flows from the ceiling would stop. But Thorn, maddened by his mistake, seemed to think they were trying to lock him out of the prize. "You're not cutting me out," he roared. He grabbed a heavy discarded rock from the floor and brought it down on the lever mechanism, smashing the bronze handles and locking them into place. The sand continued to pour. It was now up to their knees, the weight of it making it difficult to move. "The central column," Alistair shouted, pointing to the pillar holding up the telescope platform. "It's hollow. It must be a service conduit. It's our only way up." They scrambled toward the edge of the pit, the sand now swirling around their waists. Thorn, realizing his error, followed them, his face a mask of feral desperation. At the base of the column, there was a small, sealed hatch, just as Alistair had predicted. But it was locked with a circular mechanism that mirrored the rings of the mandate. "Open it!" Alistair yelled at Clara as the sand rose to their chests. Clara fumbled with the mandate, her fingers numb from the cold. She pressed it against the lock. The rings began to spin, but the sand was too high, its immense pressure pushing against the hatch, preventing the lock from disengaging. "It won't open," she cried in despair. "The pressure is too great." They were going to be buried alive. Then Alistair did something that stunned her. He turned to face Thorn, who was right behind them. There was no anger in his face, only a grim resolution. "Marcus," he said, his voice calm amidst the roaring sand. "For 17 men in Chile, for all your greed, this is your legacy." With a surge of strength, Alistair grabbed Thorn by the front of his shirt. He didn't push him away. He pulled him close, wrapping his arms around the bigger man in a final, terrible embrace. "What are you doing?" Thorn screamed, struggling. "The weight of 2 men is greater than 1, Alistair said to Clara, his voice strained. "The pressure has to be equal on all sides of the hatch. Now, Clara, open it!" Clara understood. He was using their combined weight, with Thorn, to create a pocket of pressure that would momentarily equalize the force on the hatch. It was a desperate, insane gamble based on a profound understanding of physics. She twisted the mandate. Click. The hatch swung inward. Clara tumbled through into the dark, narrow confines of the service shaft. She turned back, her hand outstretched. "Alistair!" Alistair was trying to push a struggling Thorn away, to get through the hatch himself, but the sand was at their necks now. Thorn, in his final, panicked moments, was clinging to Alistair, dragging him down. Alistair looked at Clara, his face already half covered in black sand. He gave her the mandate, pushing it into her hands. "Legacy," he choked out. Don't let it be for nothing." Then the sand surged, and the opening was gone. Alistair Finch and Marcus Thorne were consumed by the mountain. Clara was alone, in the dark, with the sound of a universe being buried above her. She clung to the cold metal of the sphere, the silence of the shaft broken only by her own ragged sobs. Days later, the official story was a tragic accident. The eccentric billionaire, Alistair Finch, had been lost, along with his entire expedition, during a sudden, violent sandstorm in a remote region of the Gobi Desert. Finch Industries' stock dipped, then stabilized. The world moved on, but in a quiet, dusty workshop in a forgotten corner of Chicago, a different story was unfolding. The workshop was no longer in danger of being repossessed. It had been purchased by a blind trust with an endowment large enough to fund its work for a century. Clara sat at her grandfather's workbench. In front of her, dismantled with reverent care, lay the celestial mandate. She had found the final secret. The heavenly stone wasn't a source of energy. It was a data crystal. The telescope in the observatory wasn't for viewing stars. It was for writing to them. It was a communications device, a library of astronomical data so advanced it would take humanity 1,000 years to understand it. Alistair hadn't found a power source. He had found a map to knowledge itself. On the bench next to the sphere lay a legal document that had been delivered by a discreet courier. It was Alistair Finch's last will and testament, amended just before he'd left for China. He had left the bulk of his fortune to various charities. But control of his entire research and development division, along with a significant operating budget, was now in the hands of a newly formed entity, the Horologist Foundation. Its director and sole board member was Clara. She picked up a small, perfectly balanced screwdriver. She looked at the beautiful, silent machine on her workbench, and then at the plans for a new radio telescope array that Alistair's foundation would now build. He had been wrong. His legacy wouldn't be a portfolio of numbers. It wouldn't be a clean energy source. His legacy was a conversation entrusted to a young woman who knew how to listen. And it was just beginning.